Welcome to Week 7 of the Introduction 2020 Faculty Perspective Series. Today's roundup of faculty talks will feature faculty from the School of Journalism and Communication, the Department of Indigenous, Race, and Ethnic Studies, the Department of Earth Sciences, the Department of Biology, and Cinema Studies. In a moment, I will turn the program over to our presenter, Dr. Priscilla Ovalle. Before that, though, I'm going to review a few things that are important to keeping you on track to complete introduction. All students watching this program should make time to submit your reflection of this session as soon as we're done. You can do that at community.uoregon.edu. Your reflections on the individual faculty perspectives programs don't have to be long, but we do want you to share what you've learned. Generally speaking, taking time to reflect in this way is a proven way to improve your retention of material, and it's a habit of tons of very successful students. If you're a student who wants to earn a credit as part of introduction, you need to select all the faculty perspectives within 2 full tracks plus 4 additional talks and submit reflections on all 20. You'll also need to submit a longer capstone reflection on the entirety of the programs and what you've learned. Finally, if you're a student who's watching in Zoom, remember that our faculty will answer your questions live on camera in the last segment of this program. Students watching in Zoom should use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen to ask our presenter your questions. What do dancing Latinas and Hollywood hairdos tell us about the ways that race, gender, and sexuality are shaped and circulated in mainstream U.S. media? Associate Professor of Cinema Studies, Priscilla Ovalle, discusses this question in this week's Engaged Humanities track. Welcome, Dr. Ovalle.
Hello, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here today. So my name is Priscilla Ovalle. It's my pleasure to be here, and I'd love to say hello from the University of Oregon and the city of Eugene, which are located on the Kalapuya Alihi, the traditional indigenous homeland of the Kalapuya people. So the goal of my talk today is to introduce myself, the Department of Cinema Studies, and the kinds of research and creative practice opportunities that are available to you here so that you can better imagine yourself as a member of the UO community this fall. So I'll start by introducing the courses I teach, a little bit about myself, the Cinema Studies curriculum, and then I'll give you a preview of my current research project in hopes of sparking your interest and your own curiosity. So I have a pretty large question here for us today. What do dancing Latinas and Hollywood hairdos tell us about the ways that race, gender, and sexuality are shaped and circulated in mainstream U.S. media? So this is basically a way to bridge the work that I've been doing for the past 25 years, starting with dancing Latinas in Hollywood films to my current project, which is looking at the production and performance of hair in music videos and commercials. So I'm looking forward to sharing a little bit about that with you and hearing any questions you might have at the end. So first question, who is Professor Ovalle? So I am a professor here at the University of Oregon in the Department of Cinema Studies. I'm committed to creative practice, media education, and community building, as well as accessible scholarship. So I like to use the stage name Professor Ovalle when I'm in front of the classroom because it gives me a reminder of my responsibility to my students as somebody guiding you and them through the work that you'll be doing as critical and creative thinkers in your time here. So just to give you a little bit more information about who I am, I just wanted to share that I am somebody who loves making things. I love working with others. I love putting on a show. I love doing research. And I love making creative and intellectual connections with things and with people. It makes me happy. It makes me excited. And I would like to also share that I never imagined being a professor. My career has been a pursuit of opportunities that have allowed me to be creative and to work with others and to create the social change that I want to see in academia and the media industries. So those are some of the things that I do and some of some of my investments. But just to give you a little bit of better sense of why I have those investments, I thought I'd tell you a little bit more about myself. So I'm a first-generation college student. I was the first in my family to go to college, and so a lot of my motivation to be here today and to be in the classroom is about helping open doors and welcome folks that might not feel like they've had a seat at the table. I am Chicana from San Antonio, Texas. My pronouns are she and they. And I, since high school, and like many of you, have been in love with media. I have loved making things and performing since as far back as I can remember. In high school, I had the opportunity to go to a magnet high school for media production. I had an opportunity to work with a Chicano and Chicana theater company in San Antonio, Texas, the Guadalupe Cultural Arts Center, where I gained training in theater and performance and writing. And then I went to Emerson College in Boston for my undergraduate degree and the University of Southern California for my my PhD. So in that time, I sort of kept shifting, like I would get really interested in performance. I would get really interested in making things. I would get really interested in working with people. And I just kept shifting gears depending on where I found myself at any given moment. So one of the things that I've kept with me, though, is that remembering that feeling of feeling a little bit out of place. I just wanted to share today that my students that know that it's okay to be shy, to be uncertain, to be anxious about college, especially now, but that there are people here that are willing and excited to welcome you and to make you feel at home. So as a Latinx woman and first-generation college student, I'm attuned to the ways that academia, like media industries, can produce both opportunity and exclusion. And so that's kind of at the core of the work that I do as a scholar and as a leader. So the things that I do here at the University of Oregon is I teach lots of different kinds of classes, but most recently I've been teaching classes in our fundamentals as well as some courses at the higher division, at the upper division level. So I teach courses in media aesthetics, I teach courses in the history of motion pictures, covering everything from the silent period to the transition to sound. I teach a course called Film, Media, and Culture, which thinks about racial representation in US-based media. And then this last winter, I taught a class called Cinema and Power, which thinks about the different power structures that operate at every single level of media production and study, from the kind of pipeline ways that certain folks have access to and are able to create things, all the way to the academic kind of systems of power that control what we study and how we study it. So those are some of the questions that I was bringing to the classroom, thinking especially together with students in this current moment where we are much more conscious about racist and sexist practices, and especially in the wake of the Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter, and more. So these are some of the things that I think about in the classroom with my students, and it's also some of the things that motivate the work that I do as a department head of cinema studies, where I lead a team of faculty that are equally committed to these kinds of questions on a global and local scale. So we have an incredible faculty that are doing this kind of work, and it's sort of it just makes me happy to think about it and talk about it. I also serve as the president-elect of the Society for Cinema and Media Studies, and what that allows me to do is see how some of these conversations that we're having here in the Department of Cinema Studies are actually happening on an international scale. So that's been really exciting for me to be able to see and to play a role in determining how we do that work here, and then how that's in conversation with a lot of the larger questions that are being asked by scholars across the globe. So what is cinema studies at UO? And I just wanted to clarify really quickly that when we talk about cinema studies, we're actually talking about film, television, and emerging media, from social media to games. So this is, we say cinema studies because we wanted to have a kind of all-encompassing term, but just to give you an example of how and why it's important to think about all of those media across the from film to television to emerging media, I'll just give you a brief history of my own education in media. So my first teacher, if you will, of film was the television. So I used to stay up till all hours of the night watching old movies on Turner Classic Movies, and just kind of inhaling whatever I could get whatever I could get in front of my eyes. I also was an avid fan of video games, and I've spent a good portion of the pandemic playing Breath of the Wild. So those are the kinds of things that I carry from my early years till now. And then when I went into production in high school and college, the work that I was doing there, I got to see an evolution happening right in front of my eyes. So in high school, I was doing video production with things like SVHS and video toasters. And then in college, I was working with 16 millimeter film, and really at that time, that's when digital nonlinear editing was starting to come into play. And so I got to see that transition happening in my own studies. And so with all of that in mind, and just thinking about where we are now with 4K and 5K cameras, with new digital platforms that are allowing us to engage media in so many different ways, I'm so fascinated by all the ways that they interact and intertwine, and those are, I think, central to the ways that we're thinking about cinema studies at UO. So, for me, the Cinema Studies program, or the Cinema Studies department here at UO is kind of a dream department, because it blends critical studies and creative practice. As a media maker, somebody who was really invested in just learning as many different aspects as I could, I was kind of surprised to find that as I went from high school to college to my graduate degree, that there was a kind of tendency to silo people in one group or the other. Either you were making things or you were studying things. And what I really love about the department that we've developed here at UO is that it really is a blend of critical studies and creative practice. We have an emphasis on narrative filmmaking on the creative production side, but we do really think globally about these issues, and we really do think about social justice issues along these lines. So it's something that appears in a lot of our classes, in our curriculum, and it's just been a really great way to explore the field. So I'm happy to be here today as an engaged humanities speaker, because cinema studies, to my mind, is one of the most engaged humanities approaches to film. So we have engagement built into the curriculum, and we're actively expanding opportunities. So in cinema studies, you have critical thinking, you have creative practice, you have opportunities for collaboration and community. And I can tell you that the faculty, staff, and student body overall, we're all invested in that sense of community that allows us to think globally and locally about the kinds of media that we want to see, that we want to make, and that have sort of brought us to this historical moment here. So just to give you a brief overview of the curriculum, you can see that we have about 6 areas that you'll be studying as a cinema studies major. We have fundamentals, which include things like aesthetics, histories, the kind of social impact that you'll see, and that is the fundamentals are a really great opportunity to explore some of the interdisciplinary connections that we have across campus. So social impact, you would see that come in a class like J201, which is a class that's offered by one of our partners, the School of Journalism Communication. We have an area, Core A, in cinema industry. So we have a component of our curriculum that asks you to think critically about the kinds of industrial structures that undergird the production and dissemination of media. We have courses in theory and criticism, which cover everything from feminist media studies to particular kind of movements and aesthetics, to particular kind of filmmakers and genres of media. And then we have Course C, which are courses that are really focused on global and transnational cinemas, and with incredible scholars that are experts in Indian cinema, Korean cinema, Indonesian cinema, Italian cinema, and more. So we've got a really excellent cohort of faculty to expand your horizons in terms of the different kinds of cinemas that we're engaging with here. We also have production courses where students will learn screenwriting, narrative filmmaking, music video production, and more. We also have an AVID certified instructor on campus, which for those of you that are interested in learning AVID, you could be trained in that that area and potentially certified based on that work. And then, of course, we have our electives, which allow for students to engage with the wide range of courses across campus that intersect with media. So courses in political science, courses in Indigenous race and ethnic studies that intersect with our work. So we really do want to make sure that the interdisciplinary aspects of cinema are clear for students that are studying it with us. So if you have questions about the major, I encourage you to meet with a Media Arts and Expression Flight Path Advisor in Tykson College in Career Advising. The MAE coordinator, Veretta Pegram-Floyd, is actually on the chat now. So if you have questions, you can give a shout out. And we also have Kate Stuckey, who is our MAE advisor there as well, who coordinates and works with lots of different departments on campus. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the things that brought me here in the first place. Dancing Latinas and Hollywood hair. Why should we care? And this is something that I've kind of just been thinking about for a long time. When I was, doing my work as a young graduate student, trying to figure out how I was going to bring all of these things that I was thinking about together into one kind of succinct story. I just started asking myself, what do I care about? What am I interested in? What do I think about? And I realized that I had a real love for musicals, Hollywood musicals, the choreography, the dynamism, the photography, the ways the bodies moved on screen. It was just so exciting to me. And so I knew I wanted to explore that a little bit. But I also knew, given my own personal investment in thinking about race and ethnicity and sexuality and gender, I really wanted to think about how Latinas in Hollywood were being represented. And then it occurred to me that there actually was this major intersection that was staring me in the face, but I wasn't really aware of, which was the fact that everywhere I seemed to look, whenever I saw a character on screen who was supposed to be Latina, she was always dancing. And I noticed it once, and I noticed it twice, and then I just noticed it everywhere, and it wouldn't kind of leave me alone. So I just kept coming back to that. What is going on here? What is going on here? And what I came to find was that, I had a question. Why do Latinas in movies always seem to be dancing? And, maybe 10 years later, I wrote a book about it, which is called Dance and the Hollywood Latina, Race, Sex, and Stardom. And so what I found in the course of this research was that all the major Latina stars in Hollywood film, from Dolores Del Rio in the early period to Carmen Miranda, Rita Hayworth, Rita Moreno, Jennifer Lopez, in the contemporary period, all of those women that we have some kind of name recognition for, and who we knew to be Latina, had all either come to the screen because they had a dance background or were presented on screen as if they were natural dancers. And so I started thinking about what that meant. What does it mean that we have this kind of assumption about Latinas on screen where their dancing is a way to convey a kind of fiery nature, a kind of sexuality that seems unbridled. And the more I looked at it as a kind of in this historical continuum, I realized that there seemed to be more to the picture, where the ways that these women were being represented on screen had a lot to do with the ways that the U.S. was sort of working through its own identity in relation to Latin American countries. So that was the kind of, it was interesting for me to think about something that was really popular and something that we don't really question or think too much about, and to see how all of these underlying historical contexts were actually telling us a deeper story. And what I really appreciated about this project, one of the things that made it so exciting for me, is that it brought together all the things that I love. It allowed me to think about performance, both in terms of the women that I was seeing on screen as dancers and actors. It helped me think about the relationship between creative practice and criticism. What does it mean for us for me as a scholar, for example, to maybe critique a Latina performer on screen who is dancing maybe in a stereotypical role that seems to be negative, right, in its stereotypical qualities, but at the same time that is providing opportunities and exposure and visibility for that performer that would not have been available to her elsewise. So I started to just think about the complexity of these questions at the intersection of creative practice and criticism. It also, because the project was historical, allowed me to get into the archives and just to experience what it means to look at memos from the 40s, sometimes with coffee stains on them, and to imagine the people that were behind those conversations of what somebody should be wearing and what they shouldn't be wearing and how they should move and how should they not move. It also, of course, meant that I had to look carefully at aesthetics. What does it mean to have a particular kind of shot framing the body? if it's a full, frame shot where we can see the body dancing from head to toe, it conveys a kind of authenticity about that ability, that performer's ability. Or what does it mean to then have a close-up of Jennifer Lopez's butt dancing? What does that tell us about how the aesthetics of a shot of composition can actually impact the way that we read bodies? And then at the kind of core, the thing that's anchoring all these elements together is my interest in the ways that racialized sexuality gets depicted in US-based media. So all of those things were coming together for me, and it was at the intersection of those elements that I started really exploring and thinking through this project. So in order to do this work, because I was thinking about Hollywood, I was really thinking about the ways that whiteness operated in these representations. So the women in this project, for the most part, were kind of made over in a particular way, so that even though they were identified or identifiable as Latina because of the storyline or because of the way they were costumed or because of the way they were dancing, there was a way that aesthetically they were being represented in ways that mirrored conventional white representations of beauty. And so that got me really thinking about how Hollywood has really been invested in that question of whiteness. And I'll give you an example here. So this is where I started to really see that bridge between the first project and the second project. So for me, in Dance in the Hollywood Latina, I started to recognize that dance was key to Latina stardom, but then in looking at two of the most successful Latinas in Hollywood, Rita Hayworth and Jennifer Lopez, I started to realize that hair was also critical to their success. So in the case of Rita Cancino, you can see on the left hand of your screen, Rita Cancino had a name change and a hair makeover where basically they gave her electrolysis that literally changed her hairline and then redid her hair color and to create her as Rita Hayworth. And so that was a key part of her narrative, right? Her star narrative in transitioning from an actor who was playing bit roles related to ethnicity to a major star who was basically carrying Columbia Studios through the 40s as an all-American gal. We see something similar happening, though with different inflections with Jennifer Lopez in the 90s and 2000s, where in her early days, and using the example of Money Train here in 95, we see her starting out her career where she is, her hair is more natural, curly, darker, and that her the kinds of roles that she's playing are built around a kind of ethnic representation. But then we see later, as her stardom starts to pick up, her mainstreaming comes along with a kind of straightening of her hair, a lightening of her hair. It doesn't come with a name change, and I think that's an incredibly important thing to point, right? In the period of 50 years, there have been some changes, but thinking about hair as something that's malleable and still important to that star process was just sparking all kinds of questions for me. And that is what led to me thinking beyond that project. So I ended the Dance in the Hollywood Latina book by looking at a case study of Beyonce and Shakira's song "Beautiful Liar," the video for the song. And so you can see a couple of stills here from that. We have in the video, the music video, we see Beyonce and Shakira performing in ways that where the camera work and the hair styling and the costuming are all intended to make you think that they are the same person, where there's a manipulation happening and it's really playing tricks on the way that the viewer is watching it. And that got me to thinking about what it means to be a non-white female performer in this contemporary period, where it's no longer necessarily about race as much as it is about a particular kind of racialized representation that is most viable for mainstream media. And so just thinking through some of those questions led me to think about, well, how much of a role was hair playing in this particular music video, and how can I learn more? So in doing the research of asking that question, who did their hair? Why was that such an important piece? It led me to the work of Kimble, who is a stylist and actually a celebrity stylist in her own right, Ms. Kimble has had a show called LA Hair, which was on WeTV for a period of time. But you may know her as one of Beyonce's key stylists. So you can see a couple of examples here of the work that she's done with Beyonce in Lemonade, for Coachella 2018, also known as Beychella, and for her work with Wrinkle in Time. So, this woman whose work had, in thinking about the role that this woman was playing as a stylist, and to think about the intimate relationship that a stylist has with a performer, that created new questions for me. So it wasn't just about the style; it became about the relationship between the person who's responsible for styling the hair, not only to have a particular look, but also to have a particular kind of flexibility, right? So if you think about the kinds of kinetic performances that Beyonce is doing, she's shaking her hair all over the place. That wig's got to stay on, right? So thinking about a stylist as somebody who is not just about the aesthetics, but also about the technical and the performative requirements of a style, that's something that really, was exciting to me to think about how all of those things were coming together. And so that just opened up a whole new arena for me to think about the work of stylists and how critical they are to the technical, performative, aesthetic aspects and character aspects of media. So this, continuing this line of thinking, I started to wonder more about the ways that hair was styled for screen and the kinds of conventions that we have come to associate with something like hair care commercials on television. So if you think about a hair care commercial, you know that there's the ubiquitous hair blowing in the wind. There's probably the moment when they release their hair, the hair, and it falls down in this glittery, billowing, cascade of typically straight hair. We've seen, more curly hair on the scene lately, and that's an important thing. But this is a long history of a particular kind of aesthetic that has been associated with hair care in mainstream U.S. media. And so thinking about the ways that, that is being created, for me, it was an opportunity to explore all the different intersections of study that can illuminate what's happening here. So hair on screen can tell us about creative labor. It can tell us about aesthetic traditions. It can tell us about technology and performance. And I want to hit on technology for just a second here, because as you can see from the slide on screen, this performer, and this is coming from a tutorial on cinematography for shooting hair that's available on YouTube by Kinetic. This is a green screen shot for a hair care commercial where you can see somebody is using a rod to choreograph the hair for the most part, right? To create that sheen that we've come to associate with these commercials. And you even have green screened puppeteers. So somebody dressed up in a green suit that's following along with the performer and like bouncing their hair. So just thinking about all the technical requirements that have undergirded these conventions is something that I was really fascinated by. But it, for me, especially now, it's really, I come back to that question. Well, so what? Like, why is this important? What do we need? Why is this something worth thinking about? And one of the things that I firmly believe is that this project has given me an opportunity to think about the ways that Black performers and Black actors have gained more visibility on mainstream television over the years, as opposed to Hollywood films. So my work is now thinking about television, commercials, and music videos specifically to better understand the ways that that hair has been crafted over time, and to build on the work that has been happening by Black studies scholars, anthropologists, Black feminists on hair, and to really, whereas the last project was thinking about whiteness as the center for Hollywood, this project is now giving me an opportunity to center Blackness and to really think about what does it mean when we can learn from the kinds of racist, sexist histories that have created a kind of tendency or these kinds of conventions that we might see in these commercials, and how does that help us understand a larger cultural issue that we might be that might need further addressing? And so I wanted to just kind of point to how these media aspects have their real world counterparts. And so we see in in 2019, we finally start to see real action being taken here in terms of banning discrimination based on hair, which is a new, this is new. So in New York and then more recently in California, we're only now seeing that lawmakers are recognizing that discrimination based on hair is a thing, and really trying to reconcile that. So those are some of the questions that I'm hoping that my work will begin to support answering as we continue on. So those are, that kind of gives you a little bit of sense of how that's come about. And so now, just to give you a better sense of how my research question is kind of changing inflection, my question is, how can the production, performance, and representation of hair in music videos and commercials illuminate interlocking codes of race, gender, and sexuality operating in U.S. media? So this is the work that I'm doing, and it's still early in the project in some ways because I'm sure you have your own hair stories. Pretty much everybody I talk to has their own hair stories. And for me, one of the challenges has been how do I whittle it down into something manageable? And that's actually a really excellent exercise for me to do because it's something that I ask my students to do all the time. We have these great, huge ideas, but we need to be able to make them manageable so that we can articulate them, share them, and then build with others to expand our intellectual horizons. So so that's kind of where my research has gone thus far. And I just wanted to kind of highlight how research really operates at the department level on campus. And in cinema studies, we have we have an essay award, the James Ivory Essay Award, where students are able to submit their papers done in cinema studies classes for an award named in James Ivory's name. Faculty can also nominate students for that award. There's also an undergraduate filmmaker award that is invested in supporting filmmakers with emphasis on social justice. And we also have an award to support students whose work gets accepted to the Society for Cinema and Media Studies undergraduate conference. So that's something that we do internally, but as a faculty in the classroom, I'm really interested in making sure students know about those opportunities, but then also thinking about the larger opportunities, such as the undergraduate research awards and scholarships that are available, the Humanities Undergraduate Research Fellowship, and more. So anytime I can, I try to make sure students know that the work they're doing in the classroom has a larger life, right? The classroom is where we're sort of incubating those questions and that work, but then it really kind of solidifies when you start thinking about it and presenting it to the world at large. And so a lot of the opportunities listed here are those first steps of starting to share that work and getting testing out your ideas and sharing and hearing back from people and kind of learning from them. So those are some of the opportunities I just wanted to highlight for students that might be interested in pursuing some of these research goals while at UO. So that's it for me today. I do want to say thank you so much for letting me be here to talk to you about our program, about my work, and I look forward to the conversation that we have this afternoon. So thanks.
Thank you so much. We do have some time for questions, and we have a couple in here. And if you're a student who's watching, do please make sure that you submit your questions in that Q&A feature. One of the questions that came up is you talked about Hollywood's investment in whiteness, requiring Latinas to undergo makeovers to appear more white. One of the other recent major issues in Hollywood with regard to race is casting white actors in roles written for and about people of color, without naming any actors' names. How does that impact the way race is shaped in mainstream media, or does it?
So just to make sure that I understand the question, it's thinking about how some of those issues might still be with us and how the casting of white actors in roles that might have been written for
meant for characters that are of a different race than the actor that's cast.
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's something that's been happening since the beginning of cinema, right?
Yeah.
And so for me, I think without a particular case study in mind, I'll kind of just pull it out and think about the question of aesthetics here. And so I think that it might be important to think about not just the casting part, because I think that's a question in and of itself, right? There's all kinds of myths about that there just aren't qualified actors of color, or these kinds of things, and that is just not true. Right. It is about the pipelines and the ways that we have historically, looked for particular performers or cast particular performers. So there's a lot there in and of itself. So I won't talk about specific people, but I'll think about instead, when people are cast into those roles, what are the codes that are used in order to make them seem as if they are that person of color, right? So what kinds of hair codes are at play, right? If it's a white actor and playing a person of color, chances are they've, had some kind of hair modification that's either darkened their hair and curled it up or something, right? There's usually something along those lines, the costuming. And again, to come back to my earlier ideas around dance, I mean, dancing is one way of doing that, right? So if you have the right hairstyle, the right costume, and you can, do a salsa step, then you kind of got a Latina in a bottle right there. Those are the kinds of things that I'm interested in thinking about, and then with those kinds of questions, you can then apply them to all the different actors that we start seeing, trying to think about some examples, and I'm terrible with names, so I'm not going to even try. But I think if you were to, whomever asks the question, if you think about the person you're imagining who's white and then cast in a non-white role, just start thinking about the ways that they're being communicated as that person of color, how costuming, production design, how is that information being conveyed to you as a viewer? And I think that is just such a rich place for exploration and critical engagement.
Well, if I'm thinking, I'm imagining recent controversy around Scarlett Johansson in particular being cast in roles written for Asian characters in particular. I think that's one that draws to my mind when I think of that topic. In some of the recent films that she's been in. So maybe that's where that question is coming from.
Yeah, and I'm trying to think about, because I'm thinking about that film in particular, and I'm wondering, does she have black hair in that role? So, just thinking about the ways that, and it happens a lot to Asian performers where they're kind of not cast, and we see that in that is not an isolated situation. Right. That happens a lot. Right. And so I think that obviously there's a need for change at the casting level and at the writing level. There's so many different layers there. And I think that's one of the things when I talk about that interdisciplinary approach to studying, an object of study, a cultural object, it's really to think about, okay, well, it's not just, that actor didn't just walk in and they were cast in that role, right? There's agents involved. There's, studio heads involved. There's marketing involved. There's, costuming involved. So just kind of trying to figure out how all those layers come together to think that that's okay is really fascinating to me.
For sure. Okay, so this one is about studying cinema studies. Even if a student is not in the cinema studies program, what would a cinema studies class add to my education?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that one of the things that the cinema studies courses provide, and again, it depends on where you're looking, because a lot of the classes that we teach have multiple things happening simultaneously, right? You might learn the historical or national context of a cinema. You might learn the aesthetic, the particular aesthetics of a filmmaker. You might learn production practices in U.S. In Hollywood film, right? So there's lots of different approaches that each person is taking, but I think one of the critical things that happens in a cinema studies classroom that will benefit students studying, political science or philosophy or any other number of things is thinking critically, thinking historically and thinking about the context, and also recognizing that the things that we consume on an everyday basis have all of these other layers coming in, that are making them possible. So I think it's that ability to take something that might seem normal or ubiquitous, right? Like a dancing Latina or, a hair care commercial, and just start finding different ways to approach it that help expand the ways that you might appreciate it. And so I think that that's something that is applicable to any field that you might be studying, right? What does it mean to take something and just to look at it in all these different ways that might shed new light on it. So I think there's the critical thinking skills, there's the research skills for sure, and then the collaborative skills. And that's something that I think occurs both in the critical studies classes and in the creative practice classes.
Thank you for that. Okay, so this is a staff related question. How can a student engage with your research?
In my research?
Yeah.
Oh, that'd be great. So I think one of the things that I have tried to do over the years is make myself more present in the classroom. So as I talked about being a first generation college student and how, how that has informed my perspective. And one of the challenges for me, and it took me many years to feel more comfortable in my skin, is that, owning being a professor and being at the front of the class and saying, this is who I am, this is my research, this is what I do, and to have people take it seriously. And I think that's a challenge for women in the classroom, for faculty of color in the classroom. So I just wanted to say that piece because it has taken me a long time to kind of share more of myself with the students. But I'm glad to do that now. I'm really excited to do that. And so any opportunity I can, I share what I'm doing. And as a result, I'm starting to hear from students that are, like they're sharing some piece that they noticed about something. And they have this, like other observation that they've made. And one of my dreams is actually to have a class where students can participate in that kind of collaborative project where we have like a kind of incubator and I give a research project and we all work on it together. So that's a dream project, but I think now in the current way, if somebody is interested in working with me on a project like this, they could potentially do a directed study. They could potentially focus some of the work that they're doing for a media aesthetics paper, for example, on the ways that hair aesthetics operate in a particular film or television show. So I think there's lots of different ways. It doesn't have to be an official way, but we can definitely have those conversations as a result of the classwork that they're doing or as a more specialized kind of research study opportunity.
Thank you for that. What are some opportunities for students after graduation with a cinema studies degree?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for asking. And I am actually meeting with Cinema Studies alumni later this afternoon. We're going to have a virtual happy hour, and I'll be talking to them to see where they've landed. So Cinema Studies is one of the newer departments on campus. We've been a program, existed as an entity for the past 10 years, but we've only been a department for the past 3 or so. So our graduates are still very new, and so we're seeing them kind of emerge and spread their wings, in real time. And one of the things that we're noticing is that we're seeing students go into do producing. Some students are going into editing. We have students that are pursuing graduate degrees. So there's a wide range of opportunities that students have been taking. And if I recall the data correctly, a good number of the graduates that we have, even though they're early in their career, are within the realm of cinema studies in some way, right? So whether that be to research a project or to be writing a project or producing a project, there's some kind of connection to the work that they've been doing here as a cinema studies student. So I think that's something I can share. But we have students that have interned and then gone on to employment at Pixar. We have people that have been doing lots of different places, and Veretta can probably even highlight a couple of additional alumni that whose careers we could follow.
Thank you so much. That's all the time that we have for questions. Again, for you students, please log on to community.uoregon.edu to complete your reflection of this program. It's also worth noting for you students that we're at a critical point in the summer where you'll begin to get more and more information from various departments on campus. It's critical that you continue to check your @UOregon email account and read those emails with attention. All of the emails that we're sending you in the coming days and weeks have a call to action for you, and taking action on those emails will be critical to your readiness for fall. So please make sure that you're reading those emails and that you're acting where we ask you to. For questions about this or any other introduction program, you can go to our website at orientation.uoregon.edu. You can email us your questions at orientation@uoregon.edu, or you can text us those questions at 541-346-1159. To you students who are watching with us, thank you so much for your time today. And to you, Dr. Ovalle, thank you so much for helping our new ducks get ready for fall.
My pleasure.